what meaning does it add to the root, and this way it will help you with the choosing the right term in the future.
All right, thank you so much, sir. I got the answer. Thank you.
Okay, so next question is from Mr. Yusuf, I believe. So my question is for to Mr. Bangoura as follows: how can we differentiate between a theory and an approach? Can you answer that, Mr. Ahmed?
Yes, yes. Wait a sec. Perfect. Can you see me? Yeah. Perfect. So the difference between an approach and a theory. First of all, a theory is supposed to explain what the idea or the concept is, or the framework of what we are studying. As for the approach, is the way of dealing with the translation, or dealing with the text. For example, when I say the functionalist theory, as I said, that there are myriads of theorists who have tackled this functionalist theory. Speaking of which, there was Christian Nord, there was also Katharina Rice with the Scopus theory. So they have all explained the idea behind dealing with the text from a purpose or a goal approach. But when it comes to the approach itself, it's how we apply it. It's how we put it down to earth. I would like to give you an example, or maybe I can also jump to the question that was addressed to me afterwards, because it helps answering that also. When it comes to AI, can it be trusted to provide a more accurate equivalence if it is not socially and culturally present? When I worked with DeepL, as I told you, I worked as an editor, and I would say, to answer your question, it depends on the linguistic combination. If it's, for example, from French to Spanish, or even between French and English, since Germanic and Latin are somehow close, you wouldn't find much problems. However, when it comes to languages that have modern languages that are very dichotomous, like Arabic and English, so that would probably pose a problem. I have found many, I would say, errors, not mistakes, that was done by the AI, developed by DeepL, and that is because of the lack of cultural knowledge. And maybe this is where I can go back to the functionalist theory, for example. If you do not know what the purpose of this translation, you would probably fail, as the AI tool has done, because we do not know what is the target audience, and we do not know what is the purpose of the translation. So just to sum it up, a theory is supposed to explain the framework, the idea, and the approach is supposed to deal with the translation, or the way we apply it. Yeah.
Thank you, Ahmed. I will jump back to Brahim. I forgot that Miss Lamia had a question for you. So we have 3 or 4 questions lined up for you, Brahim. So I hope that you don't mind. So could you please, Miss Lamia, could you please reiterate your question for Mr. Brahim?
Yes, of course. So my question was concerning interpreting. So how can we, for example, as interpreter, deal with difficult, ambiguous, or like unknown terms or sentences, or even phrases during, the action of interpreting, either simultaneous or consecutive? How can we overcome this? If we come across an unknown word or an ambiguous word which we have never known before.
Well, just to relate to the question, so this has to do with the context because, again, words live and die in context. So, saying, for example, unknown or ambiguous or difficult words, so that's in itself vague. So, for example, let's say a word that we don't know. So, we acknowledge that we don't know the word. Now, I'm sure that if there is a conference, for example, on, I don't know, something specific, palliative care, and you've prepared for palliative care, for example. So you familiarize yourselves with terms related to palliative care, رعاية تلطيفية in Arabic. So I'm sure that after, of course, attempting to extract the key terms and the recurrent concepts in this, for example, theme, I'm sure that this will help you, of course, to not be shocked by, for example, words that you have never heard before. Now, that's just for the terms. Now, it's always possible, of course, in potential to listen and to be exposed to words that we have never heard before. But here comes the importance of techniques. So an interpreter slash translator should be able to have some techniques to deal with these instances. Now, in interpreting, as I told you, so preparedness is key. So when you're prepared, when you build glossaries, when you are familiar with terms, I'm sure that these terms will be recurrent and if they will not pose any difficulty. Now, if these terms are really terms and you've never heard about these terms, then you have to contextualize the meaning. So to give the meaning, the overall meaning of that word. And of course, this is possible with explaining the meaning of that term in the context.
Thank you, Brahim. I believe the second question is from Yusuf. So he would like to learn more about the note-taking step and how can we draw from other fields in order to create our own note-taking symbols, and are there any internationally agreed upon sets of symbols?
That's a very, very interesting question. Now, again, just to relate to that, we should first start with the idea that there is nothing called universal symbols. Now, that's a fallacy. We only have personally devised symbol, because even though if you're provided with universal symbols, you will find yourself that you're not always using these symbols. Sometimes you will tend to create your own symbols. Sometimes you will have your own way of taking notes. That's why we can't just say that the starting point to learn, for example, or to use note taking is to know the universals, for example, or the universal symbols, and then apply them. Sometimes you might use, for example, an up arrow or down arrow or equal or some marks, and then afterwards you'll find that you're not very comfortable with using these symbols, and you will find yourself that you are trying to come up with your own symbols, with your own ways of explaining the logic, the coherence of that message. That's why, just to break the stereotype of universals or universal symbols, and of course, I'm not just overlooking their importance. They remain important, and of course, you can more or less use them or integrate them within your own devised system of note taking. And for that, dear Hassan, I would bring your attention to a very important resource in that. So that would be La prise de note en interprétation consécutive. It's by Jean-François Rosin, and it's a very, very seminal book, and it provides some of the universal symbols in note taking. But of course, it's not universal. It's just from the point of view of the writer, but he managed more or less to determine some of the universal symbols used in note taking. So you can use that, but of course, do not overlook the fact that you should devise your own system of note taking.
Mr. Brahim, one last question for you before we move to the ones who have their hands raised. So the question is immersion a solution for us as translators to become linguistically and culturally fluent? If so, can we discuss the possibility of training under foreign teachers in foreign institutions for that purpose?
Thank you for that question. Now, this question is leaning towards didactics, more than translation and interpreting, in the sense that as if we are suggesting the importance of the constructivist approach, for example, in learning a language. Sorry to say that, but as far as I know, and as far as scientific research is concerned in translation/interpreting, there is no emphasis on immersion, to be honest with you. Because you see, translation and interpreting are translational activities that require knowledge of two languages or more. So basically, you should just be able to use the language. Okay, so knowing the words, knowing the structure, respecting the tarjama. Okay, so we're not talking here about tarjama حرة or tarjama بتصرف. We're talking about providing a faithful, adequate translation. So if you are able to provide adequate translation, accepted translation, proper translation, no need for immersion, no need for fluency. So the idea of fluency also in interpreting slash translation is also a fallacy, because even though it's good to listen to fluent speakers, or for example interpreters who are interpreting into their A language, into their mother or native languages, it's also not possible to say that other interpreters who do not have, for example, fluency in one language, they're not translators or interpreters. It's the same thing. So fluency in itself, if we are to see it from the lens of translation, it's very difficult to define it. What is fluency in translation? So if you say accuracy in translation, yes, we're talking about grammar, we're talking about syntax, we're talking about the overall quality of translation. But what do we mean by fluency in translation? So fluency, it's more leaning, inclined towards interpreting. But even interpreting, as I told you, it's not really a criterion. It's not really معيار. Okay, because it's like with English. So if I'm doing interpreting, for example, into Englishes, you wouldn't say that maybe a native American speaker, US speaker, or UK speaker would provide better interpreting. We can't really say that, unless he was able to do this and able to deliver the message as a whole, and was able, of course, to understand it and to provide an accurate interpreting. So into English, then we do have Englishes, we have Egyptian, Australian, UK, so African countries, Englishes, so that are spoken. So that's why we can't really say fluent interpreting.
Thank you, Brahim. I think while we're at it, just one last question, because it appears that is for you. So, is it better to specialize in, for example, legal, medical, or diplomatic, or is it better to stay general at first?
So is that question addressed to me?
Yes, for you. She's talking about interpreting.
Can you repeat the question kindly?
Yeah, of course. So the question is it better to specialize, which means to specialize in, for example, legal interpreting or medical interpreting or diplomatic interpreting, or is it better to stay general at first?
Well, it has to do with the context, but stay in general at first. Now I'm underlying at first, that's something natural. Yes, I would say stay in general at first. Why? Because as an interpreter or even as a translator, you should accumulate of course, knowledge, and that knowledge should be experience based. So you can't really be a specialized translator or a specialized interpreter without having a prior knowledge in your working, of course, environment. So if you want to be a specialized interpreter, first of all, you should have worked first in different contexts, in general contexts, of course. Then you have developed your skills, you've developed your ways of working and everything. Then you can choose after, I don't know, maybe 3-5 years. Okay, after years of working, then you might choose to stick to a specific domain and master its terminology. And of course, that's based on your previous experience, which was the general experience.
Thank you, Brahim. Mr. Hadi, can you ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Faisal. I want to ask Mr. Brahim Rquabi about. I have two questions, okay? The first one, I want to ask you about something. I'm not sure if you mentioned it in your presentation about the relay interpreting technique. You know, when the interpreter is not does not have that the language in which the speaker is speaking doesn't have it in his language combinations, so that he has to listen to a relay from a pivot interpreter, and then he has to render it towards his language A. I want to ask you if you have ever had to resort to this technique, because I've heard and actually read about the fact that the European Union prioritizes interpreters to have many C languages or passive languages. Meanwhile, the United Nations wants you to be perfectly fluent and have perfect command of your mother tongue and be able to translate to it and interpret towards it. They don't care if you have many C languages in which you only understand, but have only the ability to have an input and not an output in order to interpret to it. Okay, so I just want to ask you if you have ever encountered a situation where you had to resort to this technique. And I also have a second question. Okay, this is about job markets, of course, as students that are about to graduate, inshallah, in June, or I don't know. Given the current landscape, how would you describe the job markets for simultaneous interpreters, especially for us new graduates? Are there any particular skills or niches that you think make someone more competitive today and able to land jobs in the current markets? And thank you so much.
Thank you, C. Al-Hadi, for your two questions. Now, to relate to the first question, the answer is yes. Of course, I had to do relay in many occasions. And just to broadly explain that phenomenon to you, you should understand the fact that this relay, so I didn't mention it because I didn't really consider it as a mode. Okay, so just a side technique that can be used when there are two booths, for example. There is the feature of relay. So just one click, then you can listen to the relay. Now, relay in Arabic is very interesting. So it's tarhil. Okay, so تقنية tarhil in Arabic. Okay, so relay happens when, for example, someone is speaking in, I don't know, maybe a language that you do not understand, but the booth, so there are two booths, for example, you have your booth mates, and there are other booths who are working in other languages, and some of the other interpreters are able to understand that speaker. Now, if you are doing, for example, English, French, and the speaker had to speak in Russian, if one of your friends, for example, in the other booth are able to do from, for example, Russian or from Spanish, for example, or from the language of that speaker, then they will do, for example, into French. Then you will click on the relay button on the console in the booth. Then you will listen to their interpreting, okay, not to the floor, not to the speaker. Then if they do, for example, from Russian to French, when you click that button, you will be able to listen to their French. So, and you will listen to the French, and then you will do interpreting into English. Now, that's also manifested in appearance in UN, for example, context. So in UN, for example, there are two languages that are namely used in relay, so which are Chinese and Russian. So if anyone, so if the speaker speaks in Arabic in UN, or no, maybe in General Assembly, if any speaker speaks in Arabic, then what the Russian booth should do, for example, what the Russian interpreters should do. They do not understand Arabic. What about Chinese interpreters as well? So they do not understand Arabic. So they basically use this relay. So it's just an option. It's integrated within the consoles, within the booths. So just one click, then you can listen to your booth mates, okay, from other booths, of course, from other linguistic combination, and take from their interpreting to provide interpreting. So I hope that this relates to your first question. For the second question, for the job market, of course, it's like, so speaking about interpreting, of course, it's like speaking about translation. So this has to do with you, to be honest with you. So it has to do with how determined you are. So it has to do with the fact that you're not losing hope, for example, after searching, for example, for a specific position or a specific job. But I would really want to emphasize on a very important idea in the job market, which is the importance of freelancing. So I would really suggest that after graduating, so instead of working with a given agency, for example, in translation, for example, or in interpreting, I suggest that you can just go with freelancing, because when doing freelance, then you can really control the fees, control the prices you're requiring and everything. Okay, and of course you will have some time for yourself, you will have more flexible schedule. And believe me, if you go with the contract oriented work, so you will end up, first of all, you will have much workload, and then believe me, the prices will be not up to the expectation vis-a-vis the freelance. And also freelance, I'm not saying that freelance is the perfect option or the optimal option, but I would say that it really gives you, it compensates you psychologically, and of course in time when it comes to having flexible schedule and to be able to do more, of course, with less time.
Thank you, Brahim. Can we move to Miss Mariam's question?
Yes. So thank you so much for these fruitful contributions. So my question is, what should a translator do when the source text include ethical violations or factual errors? Should they stay completely neutral, or can they clarify through footnotes without breaking translation ethics? I have an example that I have encountered in my translations. If a source text, for example, describes Hamas as a terrorist group, even though we know this label is politically disputed, are translators obliged to translate it exactly as it is, or can they adjust or clarify without breaking neutrality? And they have another question about sport field. Are there any opportunities, translation opportunities in sport field? And if they exist, could you provide us with some examples? Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that question is for you, Ahmed.
Yeah, the first one is for my professor Ibrahim Rquabi, since he talked about neutrality, and the second one is for Mr. Ahmed.
Okay, perfect. Brahim, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the question. Of course, when speaking about neutrality, the translator or the interpreter should really pay attention to the text that he or she is dealing with. But nevertheless, in translation, so that's very easy to tackle. So you can resort to footnotes, you can resort to endnotes, and but of course you should stick to the message, to the spirit of the text. You can just add or omit or substitute or I don't know, maybe adapt that to your own convictions in your own ideology. So if there's something politicized, as you have mentioned, so terrorism, qatla, shuhada, so that kind of language, so you should really maintain these terms, and you should really be careful when translating these terms. So same thing with sometimes we find the term a lot neutralized, so people were neutralized. So most of the translations or most of the naql al-ma'na for that, so usually they say tahyid. So instead of say qatl or they they just go with tahyid, because neutralized, it's like they were neutralized, they were removed from existence. So that could be for buildings, for people, for airplanes, for everything. So that's why we should really maintain the word, we should maintain this humula and try to do that into the other language. Now, if we were able to do that at a word level, like this one, neutralizing tahyid, that it's fine. But sometimes it's good, the context can be more profound than that in religious, for example, or when dealing with sacred texts, when translating sacred texts. Then the translator should be very careful, and that's why if you've ever consulted the translation of sacred text, for example, the translation of the Noble Quran by Yusuf Ali, you will notice that when speaking about translating Quran, there is nothing called, no title for these. For example, for Yusuf Ali or others would say, for example, the translation of the Noble Quran, full stop. No. So it's always the translation of the Noble Quran and commentary, for example, or expansion, because they should always comment, they should always shed light, they should always clear any misunderstanding if existed. Same thing for saying, for example, in sacred texts, savior. Would we just go with Arabic and say, for example, munqid, mukhallis? So I mean, they're talking about salvation, they're talking about redemption. But do we have the same concept? Do we have an equivalent, a function equivalent for that in our context, in our religion, for example, of course, we do not have. Yes, we may deliver it linguistically, in say مخلص الفداء, etc., etc. But we can't really deliver the functional equivalence unless we've distanced ourselves from that text and, of course, try to bring on the functional equivalence, which is in this case, that would be shafa. So if they're saying something like our savior, so that automatically means that they are talking about shafi'una, for example, which is intercession in English. So to intercede, shafa as a representation. So the fact that the prophets, may peace be upon him, will sayashfa linnas, so will represent, so will come, will face Allah instead of the people. Okay, so that's something we have, but they have the savior. Okay, so that just to relate to the idiosyncrasies of not just politicized, but also sometimes sacred in other types of text. So be careful. So try always to remain, to take the stick from the middle. Of course, it not to be he has to be biased to any party or to any convictions or ideologies. In case you couldn't do that, you can just explain via footnotes or endnotes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And I suppose that I have to answer the second part of the question, which is about the sport field related to translation, right?
Yes, opportunities in sport fields.
Okay, perfect. Honestly, I don't have an idea about the demand of translation in the sport field, to be honest. I haven't encountered much, but I think where you can find opportunities is whether on LinkedIn or Indeed. So what I would advise to do is to have already prepared a portfolio where you can showcase the translations you have worked on, especially ones on which you haven't signed an NDA, and non-disclosure agreement. So, for example, if you have worked with some agency or as a freelance translator, you can compile the translations you have worked on and put them on a portfolio so that you can showcase your work when the opportunity is there. And I would suggest to probably do not wait for the opportunity, because sometimes you have to go look for this opportunity, and which I did, to be honest, in my beginning. So for me, I was more inclined towards the legal field. So I used to contact translation offices or agencies to propose my services, and I used to include in the emails I sent the translations I did. So probably maybe you can follow the same pattern, and it would probably lead to something positive. And I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, folks.
You're welcome. Just before you lend the floor to Mr. Faycal, I had another question on the chat, which I think I have already answered, which is about Mr. Mohammed Mufak has said, do you think there is any 100% possibility that AI will replace the role of human translators one day, or will humans always be needed for certain parts of translation? No, I think humans will always be there. There was the industrial revolution, and we have also our revolution, which is conducted by AI. But as there was the industrial one, as you can see, humans were not replaced 100%. There were some roles that were replaced, and I believe that the same thing applies for AI. So even if AI is used worldwide and it is relied upon on many projects, but I think humans are still necessary or sine qua non for this operation of translation. First of all, because of the privacy, and second of all, because of the accuracy. As I have already mentioned, many times you can find that AI does lack some cultural knowledge. And since culture is also a non-constant element, I would say, so translators will always be there. Yeah.
Thank you, Ahmed. I believe there's another question from Adil. I think it's for Brahim. So the question is, well, his message is, I'm currently studying court and asylum interpreting. I am particularly interested in how interpreters manage cultural mediation and maintain impartiality under pressure. Could you share your insights on best practices or recent research regarding these challenges? I believe you already spoke about this matter, but could you please answer it, Brahim?
Yes, thank you for your question, Adil. Now, going back to asylum interpreting, so I related to this and I said that in this context, in this setting, you will namely find consecutive interpreting, not simultaneous interpreting. And that would really remove the concept of under pressure. I'm not going to say it's going to remove it completely, but believe me, there is no pressure in consecutive or contrary to simultaneous, because in consecutive you will have the time to take notes, you will have the time to write down what was said by the speaker, then you will have to interpret that. Now for cultural mediation, so you can't be cultural mediator unless you are a cultural adept. So if you are not really mastering the two cultures, if you are not really mastering the languages, you can't really achieve cultural mediation. But believe me as well here when we say that cultural mediation is not as important as register, as the terminology of this setting. So if they are speaking about jail in prison, for example, and you said that that person is going to be sentenced to jail, for example, it's not the same as saying to prison, because one refers to 5 years or minimum and the other one is 5 years or more. So you just have to be selective, okay, and really careful in terms of using the right words in the right terms in this context. And believe me, don't worry about the cultural mediation. No one is going to ask an asylum seeker what's I don't know, maybe her or his favorite meal, for example, talk about cultural references as much as they're going to focus more on his case. So why coming, for example, to the US? Why applying for asylum seeking? What scares you? What makes you afraid from going back to your country of origin, etc., etc. So I don't think that the emphasis here is laid on cultural mediation as much as it is actually laid on mastering the terminology and mastering the political, in this case, jargon.
Thank you, Brahim. I think. Okay, so we have another question. I believe this one is for Ahmed. So the question is, how do you manage to translate a large number of paragraphs in a short time while preserving contextual meaning, especially when translating legal texts that require precise terminology, such as cases involving foreigners and criminal matters? As far as I know, this type of translation demands extreme attention to detail because even a single mistake can change the entire meaning.
Yes, thank you for your question. I don't know what's the matter here. Is it with time management or with the management of the terminology? Because, well, if it is a problem of terminology, I mean, this is just a matter of practice. And by dint of getting exposed to legal text and training on legal text, you acquire the equivalence, and you can also make your own glossary. As for if you are talking about the loads of work, I mean that depends on you. That depends on your competencies and what is the deadline you require in order to deliver a certain translation, and especially if you have even more loads of work prior to that. So that's up to you to determine the delay, or the deadline of your translation to be submitted. I have answered your question.
Thank you, Ahmed. Basically, the lady's message wasn't complete, so this question was actually meant for Brahim, because it tackles simultaneous interpreting, court simultaneous interpreting. Could you share your thoughts, Mr. Brahim?
Yes, thank you for the question. So again, when speaking about courts, we're namely speaking about consecutive interpreting, not simultaneous interpreting. So the judge is not going to speak while you are sitting in a booth and providing simultaneous interpreting. That's very rare. Now, rather than that, you will have the judge speaking, you're taking notes, and then interpreting what he's saying. Then you will have the clients with him. The client can be the plaintiff or the defendant, or they can both be there with the judge. And then you will have to shift gears and to interpret for all the parties. But as I told you, so here it's not just about life imprisonment, so it's also about the fact that the judge might misinterpret the case of that person. So if someone came, for example, to the US seeking, for example, refuge or as an asylum seeker, then when he is telling his story, he will be asked to relate to some point. For example, why you are scared to go back to your country of origin, for example. So, and there are some conventions that governs the work of immigrant judge. Okay, so there are conventions on torture, there are conventions on human trafficking. So that's why you should be really careful when dealing with these parts. But because again, this has to do with the fact that the judge should thoroughly understand the full story of that person coming, for example, to a country to be an asylum seeker there. Okay, now if you do that, and of course if you master consecutive interpreting, if you were able to split your attention by of course taking notes to jot down words, proper names, numbers, names of countries. You have destination countries, for example, someone came from, I don't know, MENA region all the way to the US. There is a trajectory there. So for example, you should be careful to not miss, for example, position the right sequence of these countries. So I went from Morocco to Spain, then from Spain to France, then from France to Nicaragua to Mexico to the US, for example. So you can't just mix that. So pay attention to that. For that, you need to use note taking. For the second part of your job, you should focus on the speaker and try to maintain the gist of what he's saying, the key and the main ideas. And then combining the two will ensure that you will provide adequate, good interpreting.
Thank you, Brahim. I believe that's all. Thank you guys for your questions. Is there any other question? I'll just give them some time if they have any other question before we conclude. Yes, Miriam, what's your question?
No, it's not a question. I'm just wondering if you could share your presentations and where you can share them.
Yeah, so we've tried to share them in the chat, but there is no option for that. So if anyone requires or needs our presentations, maybe you can contact us on LinkedIn or our socials, and we'll be happy to provide them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Do you guys have any question? All right. Thank you, everyone, for your active participation and engagement throughout today's. Yes, Ahmed. Yes.
Sorry for interrupting you. I have just shared the link to my presentation. You can click on the link, or maybe you can copy it and save it, and can go back to it whenever you want. It's on Prezi, and it's public, so whoever has a link can have access to the presentation. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ahmed. So as I was saying, thank you so much, everyone, for your active participation and engagement throughout today's session. I would like also to thank my colleagues, Ahmed and Brahim, for their contributions and practical insights. I would like to thank El-Hadi for the coordination. I would like also to thank the master's program and the coordinators for hosting us and providing us with this opportunity. Thank you so much. So we have moved from terminology analysis to translation, insights, and to tips for interpreting or interpreting strategies. And so basically the key takeaway is simple. When I talk about terminology, understanding how terms are formed, how they behave across languages, and how they influence translation and interpreting leads to more accurate, consistent, and efficient outputs. So if you don't have any additional questions, we are done. And maybe if you do have additional questions, maybe we can continue the discussion or the conversation elsewhere. Thank you once again for joining us, and this concludes our webinar. Thank you.